In this tutorial, we're going to look at how we can make a custom marking menu in Maya. So if I pull up the Hotbox here, by default, if we click on the left mouse button, we have this marking menu that allows us to pull up different editors as our panel. I personally like having these come up as windows over top of my existing panels. So what I've done is I've created a custom marking menu that'll pull up something like the outliner up as a window, or the node editor, and I also have a few custom commands down here that I frequently use: delete history, freeze transformations, and center pivot. So let's look at how we can make this type of custom marking menu. Everything happens in the marking menu editor. So we can find that under Window, Settings, Preferences, Marking Menu Editor. And so you can see that I've made this window opener in the Hotbox South region. So what we can do is click Create Marking Menu, and this pulls up a blank template for marking menus with each of the different corners: northwest, north, south, southeast, etc., and the linear items down here. So let's say if we wanted to edit this first menu item up here, we can give it a label and perhaps an icon file name, and then we get this commands. Now, how do we know what command to put in that will bring up the window that we want? Well, this is something that we have to do a little bit of experimentation and investigation. So what I'm going to do is just close this here. We can actually give this a name, call it window opener. I'm going to have to call it 2 because I already have one that I've created. And just hit save and then close. And for now, we're just going to close this marking menu editor because we don't yet know what commands we're going to have to put into it. So for the time being, I'm going to turn on the main menu bar, and I'm actually also going to turn on the shelf, and I'm just left mouse clicking to the east of the Hotbox here and pulling up the shelf. And I'm going to make a new shelf, and I'm going to call it window opener. And this is going to be a temporary shelf that's going to hold each of the commands that we're eventually going to slot into our marking menu. Then I'm going to open up the script editor, which we can access down here, and just clear everything out by clicking this eraser button. We also want to make sure that we've got echo all commands, and I've just pulled up this marking menu by holding down the right mouse button down to history, echo all commands. We want to make sure that that's checked. And what that's going to do is it's going to output in the script editor every command that Maya is running in order to make the program work. So what's going to happen here is if we click Window, Outliner, we're going to see a whole bunch of text fill up our script editor here. And this looks like a lot of confusing jargon, and in fact it is, but what we need to look at is here this first command, or one of the first commands, that just says outliner window, and this is something called a runtime command, and this calls everything else. It's got a capital letter as the first, and that's one key that it's a runtime command, and this is really all that we need to call initially in order for the outline to come up. So we can do a test here. If we select outliner window, middle mouse drag this text down to a Mel tab, and if you don't want to have one open, you can just right mouse click and hit new tab and then click Mel. So we can clear out the history and just hit enter on the numpad, and that will pop up the outliner, so we know that that works. And again, outliner window is the first thing that gets called. So all we need to do is select the text again. Instead of dragging it down into the commands view here, we can just middle mouse drag it onto our shelf. And it's going to ask us if we want to save it to the shelf as Mel or Python. Of course, this is a Mel command, so we'll click Mel. And we get a icon up here that isn't very meaningful for us. So what we can do is right click, edit. We can see that the command has been copied successfully, outliner window. So we can go over to the Shelves tab. We can rename it if we want, outliner, for example. The tooltip doesn't matter too much for us. We can put in an icon label such as out, and really there's only enough, you can see it come up here, out, so that's more meaningful for us. There's really only room for about 4 characters, I think, on these sort of small icons. Then we can hit Save All Shelves, and we have a shelf button that pops up our outliner window. So the next thing we need to do is figure out all the other windows that we want to pull up. And just because this isn't really a Mel tutorial, I'm just going to clear everything and copy in the rest of the commands that will help us out here. So texture view window, that'll pull up the UV texture editor. Then we have the hypershade, the graph editor, the node editor. Then we've got 2 for the hypergraph. We've got hypergraph with the hierarchy mode and hypergraph with connections mode, called DG for directed graph, I believe. And finally the attribute spreadsheet. So we can just select each of these and bring them over to the shelf. And this will give us all of the commands that we need for the radial part of our custom marking menu. So we can go over to shelves here and just put in icon labels. So for the UV texture editor, we can do UVTE. For the hypershade, we can call it HS. Graph editor, node editor, hypergraph hierarchy, hypergraph connections, and finally the attribute spreadsheet. I'll only give that one S. And then save all shelves. And now we still need a few of the commands for the linear part. So now we've got, if I right mouse button down here, we've got each of these radial menu items that are going to pull up our windows, but I still need the linear ones down here. So that is also possible if we just wanted to, for example, click on this and edit, delete by type. Actually, sorry, we should just clear this out so we know what we're looking at. Edit. In fact, we can select it first and then clear it. This thing fills up really quickly when you have echo all commands, and so it can be hard to search through so many different commands. Edit, delete by type, history. So we've got delete history, and then it really only calls this one piece of code, delete, and then with the flag CH. And that's really all we need. So instead of pulling up this runtime command, I'm just going to pull up the command itself because I know that this is the actual Mel code that does what I want it to do. I can middle mouse drag it down here, and because I've got these code colorization, well, it's a cue that it's a correct command. I can highlight that and then right mouse click down to quick help, and then over to the side here I can see that CH refers to delete construction history, so I know that that's the command that I want. So again, I can middle mouse drag it up to our temporary shelf here. And for the other ones, freeze transformation, I'm just going to copy them in here for your benefit. Freeze transformations, and on this one, freeze transformations options, that's actually going to pull up the options box, which we might want to access from our marquee menu. And then this last one is actually transform CP, and that is center pivots. So that's the only thing that we need in order to center our pivots. So one at a time, let's just again pull these up into our shelf. And then because when they're blank, it doesn't help us at all, so let's go and edit it. So this one's going to be delete history, freeze transformations options, and finally center pivot. Okay, so now we can close the script editor. We're done with that, and we've got all of the commands that we want in our shelf here. Now we could use these as is in the shelf, but I prefer to use them as marking menu. So in the next part, we're going to see how we can slot each of these into our custom marking menu.